Good afternoon. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Munich Re's inaugural dive-in event. I just want to take a moment before we start to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land to which we meet today, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to the elders past, present and emerging. I'd also extend that respect to those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and their country, where the people on the virtual call are also with us today. I'd also like to thank Kennedy's for assisting us in putting on this great event today, and I hope you really all enjoy it. A couple of housekeeping things. So I'd ask everyone if they could please put their phones on silent, but keep them within arm's reach, because we will be asking you to do some work and do some poll and voting for us in a little while. So today we want to talk about intergenerational. We want to talk about the power of intergenerational diversity and inclusion. And what's really important is that we harness the power of the different ages that we have within our organisations to create a diverse and inclusive environment where we can all thrive. I want to pass over to Phil Cross. So Phil will talk to us about that. And really what we want to focus on today is the real learning opportunity that we can take, and how do we bring back and harness the intergenerational diversity within our organisations to help us thrive, and also ensure that we leverage the benefits that we have from the various ages that we have in our organisations. So with that, I'd pass over to Phil.
Thank you so much, and hello to all of you here today. It's great to see so many people in the room. We're here to talk about a topic that is, hopefully the clicker works. We're here to talk about a topic that is really important, and I think a topic that's underserved. So my name's Phil Cross. I'm a founding partner at Leaders for Good. So we're an organisation that focuses on diversity, equity and inclusion, as well as leadership in the workplace. And we work to roll out DEI strategies for lots of organisations. And the number of organisations that have age as a focus when we start working with them, I can count on one hand. And for something that impacts every single one of us in one way or another over the course of our working lives, that's a real missed opportunity. That's a real missed opportunity to enhance the well-being of individuals. That's a real missed opportunity to unlock performance, innovation, all of that good stuff. So what we're going to talk about today with my esteemed panel, who I will introduce you to in a second, are some of the challenges around ageism and intergenerational inclusion, as well as some practical, tactical stuff that you can take away and do in your day-to-day, because it's really the actions we all take that make the difference. So some stats to kind of frame the discussion. These are from the Australian Human Rights Commission. 63% of the people who answered this poll say they experienced some degree of age discrimination in the last 5 years. That's a huge number, hey. One that shocked me, 1 in 10 workforces said that they had an age over which they would not hire people. Now, that's obviously illegal. This was an anonymous poll. But if 1 in 10 people is quite happy to admit to that in an anonymous poll, how high is that figure really? And the number over which they said they would not hire was 50. So obviously huge implications there. But because of declining birth rates, because of increased longevity, we're actually seeing more and more generations present in the workforce, up to 5 different generations in the workforce. So the opportunity here is profound. And I love this slide. I overuse this slide, but really it speaks to what happens when we experience exclusion. So whether it's intentional through deliberate discrimination or prejudice, or for the most part, unintentional, just people's unconscious bias playing out in their decisions, in their words, in ways that make people feel excluded, we have an impact on people's well-being. So when people feel excluded, be that a drip feed in small ways every day, we get those release of those threat hormones. We get the cortisol, and we get the adrenaline, and we get that low level fight, flight, freeze or please. So we get increased stress, anxiety and illness. In fact, social isolation has been shown to be more harmful to people's health than a pack-a-day smoking habit, for example. So real physical impacts to people. It has impacts on motivation. think of a time when you felt excluded in life. How willing to put the extra yards in were you in that scenario? Probably not. Hey. And performance, people are not contributing their ideas. People are not collaborating in the same way. And on the flip side, when we lean in, when we take deliberate steps to include more and more people, more and more perspectives, we unlock all the feel-good chemicals. People feel more motivated, and people are learning. They're more likely to share their ideas, and they're more likely to challenge norms and conventions. So really important. I'd invite you just to consider a question. We'll get you to answer this in a poll towards the end of these few slides we're going to share at the start. But just think about, have you or somebody you know experienced age discrimination in the workplace? So just hold that in mind as we go through, because maybe some of the examples we show, maybe you're thinking no right now, and maybe some of the examples we share with you might kind of jog some different perspectives on that. We will be using, it worked, great. We will be using Slido for this session today for a couple of different reasons. So take out your phones. Online, you should have a link as well. And if you don't, you can scan the QR code or go to slido.com and you can pop in the number you can see on the screen there. This will allow you to do two things. It will allow you to participate in the poll, and importantly, it will allow you to ask questions of our panel as well. So you can pop any question in there. You can upvote people's questions if somebody's already asked something that that's on your mind, and we will get to as many of those as we can during the panel discussion. Okay, you'll have another chance to scan that in a second. So I will do a full introduction to these lovely individuals in a second as we call them up, but we have some real wisdom in the room when it comes to this topic. Unfortunately, Sommer Green is not well today and will not be joining us. She is here in spirit, and the panel we've collectively absorbed some of her insights through the conversations we've had so far. So we'll try and play back some of that to you, and we hope Sommer gets well soon. So what I want to do just before we get into the discussion is give you a bit of a model, a framework to help you think about not only the nature of the challenge, but also some of the things that you might take away and do. This is a model we use in the change space very extensively in the work we do. And what we use it for is providing a kind of whole systems lens on the nature of a challenge. So what we're looking at really kind of covers all the dimensions of making change. So first of all, the mindset of individuals. What are our thoughts? What are our feelings? What are our beliefs? What are our biases? What are our personal biases as people trying to make change? And what are the biases and values and beliefs of the people we're trying to work with? What are our actions? What are our behaviors? What are we doing? What are we saying? How are we making decisions? Again, very, very important for making change, and how are those informed? Of course, considering the culture that we're working with. What are our collective beliefs? What are our norms? What are our dynamics? Ignoring the culture that we're trying to impact and we're trying to benefit is obviously a mistake. And then thinking about the systems and processes, the tools, the technology that we're using can have a profound impact. And what we see is when we get all of that right, we unlock belonging, innovation, growth, all of that good stuff. When we miss one, though, we miss something important. Not really connecting to the issue on a cognitive level, we tend to be motivated. If we don't see it as a problem, we're not likely to do anything about it. If we don't engage in any behavior that's different, then we're ineffective because we're not doing anything differently. If we ignore the culture or we try and go too much against the grain, we can meet significant resistance. And if we don't think about our systems and processes, we can sabotage our efforts. We can have the best will in the world, but if our hiring process is full of bias, that's a problem, right? So we're just going to touch on each of these very briefly again, just to help you kind of think through this challenge. So culture. I love this quote from the philosopher Krishnamurti. You think you're thinking your thoughts. You're not. You're thinking your culture's thoughts. Now, we're just taking a moment to kind of ponder this. We know that it's true, right? The household we grew up in, what we absorbed from our caregivers, from our parents, what we saw them role model, what we heard them say, the books, the movies, the TV shows that we watched all have a profound impact on how we think and how we treat certain topics. We don't have to look very far to see that this is true. We look at Australian culture versus the culture in the UK versus Japan versus Thailand to see that people have a very different way of looking at the world and thinking about things. Hey, so our culture is really important. And I like this. This is the good old cultural iceberg model. It obviously shows up in our words and actions, but it is influenced by our values. values is a word that gets bandied around in organizational life a lot, but it's really at its heart, it's what we value. So if we value wisdom and experience, that might inform a belief that we should respect our elders. You know, that's a common trope you hear, right? Respect your elders. And that might lead to assumptions, things like only older individuals are capable of leadership. And of course, what does that assumption and what does that belief drive? Well, it drives certain hiring practices, promotion practices in the workplace, for example. And of course, we exist within many cultures. So the national culture that we inhabit, but we may be in a organization that has a very different team culture. So nationally, we might value wisdom and experience, but we're in a young tech-focused organization that, again, has a very different set of biases. So taking that into account is important. Our systems and processes. Won't touch on this too much. From a legal perspective, law and policy, Alan's going to talk far more deeply to this as we get into the session, but you know, the Age Discrimination Act here in Australia makes it illegal to discriminate on grounds of age when you're hiring somebody. But that stat I shared before about organizations are actually doing that, and individual hiring managers may have those biases. So we need processes in place. That's why a lot of organizations, for example, have CVs where they strip out personally identifiable details. They strip out age, gender, photos, all that kind of thing when people are applying, because they don't correlate to success in the job and their sources of bias. And the technology we choose as well. Are we designing our systems? Are we designing our software and our hardware with a consideration of people from different generations, different abilities, being able to use that effectively? Mindset. So our mindset is obviously deeply influenced by the culture we inhabit, and it wouldn't be a DEI talk without me touching on bias. Bias is a dirty word. It gets a bad rap. It's a normal, necessary part of being a human being. Is simply our way of taking the vast complexity and overwhelming amount of information out there in the world and making it usable and useful. It's the mental shortcuts we use to make sense of the world. So if you have a brain, you have bias. These biases are helpful for navigating the world, but of course, the biases can cause trouble as well when they show up in the form of stereotypes. So if we hold stereotypical beliefs like older people are bad with technology, younger people are irresponsible and impulsive, these are stereotypes and biases that some people hold, which again have profound impacts for people in the workplace. And importantly, the typical way we think about these is outside in. So we hold an assumption or a set of beliefs about a group of people or individuals. That certainly is true, but we also self-apply these. If you've ever caught yourself saying, I'm too young for, I'm too old for, ... fill in the blank, where did you get that belief from? And is that actually true? Or are you just kind of recycling a trope that you've heard? Just interesting to consider. So we apply these biases to ourselves too. And lastly, our behavior. And I'll chunk this down into just a couple of different categories here. So how we communicate, our language, the images we choose, etc. Now, I could sit here and give you a list of words to say and words not to say. I prefer actually how the Diversity Council of Australia talk about this, thinking about, is the language you use respectful, accurate, and relevant? So is it respectful? Are you making ageist jokes or comments, for example? Is it accurate? Are you using bucket terms like old people, young people? What does that mean? Where are the bounds of that? And is it relevant? Is mentioning somebody's age relevant in a particular context? Why are you bringing that up? Does that add anything to the conversation? Or again, is it just another point of potential bias? And then it's in the decisions we make. So based on our stereotypes, based on our personal biases, who are we asking for advice? Who are we including on projects? Who are we spending time with in the organization? Who are we hiring? Who are we, or are we choosing to go on learning and development opportunities, for example? All of these are pretty profound considerations, hey? So without further ado, first of all, a poll. There we go. I did promise we'd use this. So thinking through all of that, just to get a sense of everybody in the room and hopefully you online as well, have you experienced age discrimination that you've kind of consciously clocked? So let's just see where this takes us in terms of answers. All right, healthy amount of votes coming through. Fairly overwhelming. it looks like we're going to be pretty much in line with the with this human rights study statistic I showed at the start, which is there you go. That's fairly interesting. So, okay, we'll move on from there. We'll take that as a thing. Thank you for taking part in that, by the way. So, without further ado, I'm going to introduce you to our panel. So I would invite the three of you to come up. I've just got my notes so I don't mess up anyone's bio because they are quite extensive here. Dr. Marlene Krasovitsky, so a consultant to the World Health Organization's campaign to combat ageism, director and co-chair of Every Age Counts, Australia's coalition-led campaign against ageism, and previously director of Willing to Work, the national inquiry into employment discrimination against older Australians and Australians with disabilities for the Australian Human Rights Commission. Big round of applause for Dr. We joked before we needed walkout music for everybody. I still think that's true. Anja Linsmaier, more than 15 years experience in the reinsurance industry, currently head of Non-Life, responsible for the strategic direction of the Non-Life business at Munich Re, and is a passionate advocate of diversity and inclusion and building inclusive and diverse teams, and has a massive experience there. So big round of applause for Anja. And last, but of course, by no means least, Alen Sinanovic, special counsel at leading Australian and global insurance firm Kennedy's in Perth, active champion for embracing diversity and inclusion to help build more inclusive cultures. And he brings a unique perspective to the table, both from a legal angle and as an employment practices and discrimination law specialist. So again, big round of applause for Alen. All right, so we'll dive in. We'll go through some questions for the panel, and then we'll open it up and see what you've got on your mind on Slido. But Dr. Marlene, I'd like to throw to you first, if I may. So, given your experience with Every Age Counts, with the World Health Organization, with the WHO, can you paint us a picture? Like, what you must have a wealth of insights into the nature of this challenge. Just a fairly open question, but I'd love you to expand on that.
Thank you very much. And I'm really happy to pick up on some of the themes and some of the questions that you've raised. It's a pleasure to be here. So thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to start with the definition of ageism. And ageism is stereotyping, prejudice, and discrimination towards others or oneself based on age. So stereotypes, how we think. All old people are frail, foolish, forgetful. All young people are impatient. They want everything. They know everything. Prejudices, how we feel about older people. Old is scary, ugly, to be denied. Young is impetuous, irresponsible. And lastly, how we act. This is the discrimination, where we lock older people out of work, or we refuse younger people promotions because they're too inexperienced. Now, ageism and age discrimination can be experienced across the life course. It's not just about older people, but the form may take a different approach. I'm going to make this personal and ask you, how do you feel about getting older? How do you feel about younger people? Chances are some negative words, associations will have popped up in your mind. And the reason I ask you this question is when those words pop up in your mind, ask yourself, do they hold? Are they real? Are those assumptions based on truth, experience? Are they impacting my decisions? Are they impacting the way I see people? How am I viewing young people, older people? What words do I use? So these are critically important questions, and that's your homework from today. So moving on though, in terms of the reason that I ask those questions and I start with our own approaches is because ageism, unlike other forms of discrimination and prejudice like racism and sexism, is still highly invisible. It's highly tolerated. We don't even see it. let alone recognise its impacts. So it is worthwhile having this conversation about ageism and its impacts. And of course, ageism, like other forms of discrimination and prejudice, is about othering. It's about setting up an opposition, someone, an other, so that you can be in conflict or not like them or think about them differently, whatever it is. But the thing is, with ageism, this is not about them. There's no them. This is us, either just recently or soon. We're all aging and we're all capable of being ageist. Now, I just want to highlight, Phil talked about the experience I had with the Australian Human Rights Commission and Willing to Work. And I just want to reflect back to you some of the things that we heard. The focus was older workers, from older workers during that inquiry. At recruitment, older workers were telling us, it's like I've got a use by date on my forehead. I've never had to think about my age until I started applying for work. In the workplace, everyone started to treat me differently. I keep dyeing my hair to hide my age. I'm being passed over for promotions or learning opportunities because everybody thinks I'm on a path to retirement. So these things are powerful. They have a real impact. From the point of view of recruiting managers, hiring managers, a lot of people were telling us that taking on an older worker was seen as a social service rather than acknowledging the skills and contributions of an older people. So this stuff is real. This stuff has a real impact. And the more we can address it articulately and expressly, the greater capacity we have to harness the benefits of all ages in the workforce.
Wonderful. Anja, Alen, any builds or thoughts on what Marlene just shared?
No, I think I can only second that. I think it's a really real topic. And what particularly resonated with me was the part about casual ageism just being accepted. After 15 years in the insurance industry, I think we've made a good stride. I think we made progress, and I think we talk about it more freely. But certainly when I started 15 years ago, it was very different, and the experiences that I had. And so I'm really glad we're here today. I think a panel like what we're having and the discussion and all of you coming is a sign that we're making the progress that we need to make.
I did. Alen?
Just to pick up on what Marlene said earlier in relation to how subtle sometimes discrimination is in the workplace, yet we see the statistics from the Australian Human Rights Commission that actually show that it is really prevalent. It just is not as obvious as maybe as other forms of discrimination.
Yeah. And just to echo something that someone might have said, should you have been here, but when we're designing products, when we're designing services as organizations, because as organizations we all have customers to one degree or another, there's a principle of inclusive design which is nothing for us without us. So including people who your products or services meant to be used and consumed by in the ideation, in the design process. And if we don't consider intergenerational inclusion in the workplace, if we fail to build organizations which are representative of the communities that we serve, of the customers that we serve, we're missing a huge opportunity to build products and services which are relevant, which are usable, and which are accurate as well. So we're missing out from that perspective too. Wonderful. And yeah, I might throw it to you as well. So wealth of experience, senior leadership experience at a large organization, and a passion for building diverse and inclusive teams. I'd love you to unpack some of the challenges behind that. So when we're thinking about building teams which are age diverse or diverse in lots of other ways, because we haven't touched on intersectionality yet, but I'm sure we will in terms of age doesn't sit in isolation in terms of our identities. But yeah, what are some of the challenges faced when we're building diverse and inclusive teams?
Thank you very much. A very good question. And maybe before I answer that, I want to highlight why it's such a relevant topic, especially for the insurance industry. Dive-In is kind of an event created for our industry. And some of you may have seen the recent ICA talent roadmap that was published, and it estimates that about 30% of the workforce in the Australian insurance industry has reached or will reach retirement age by 2030. I'm pretty sure that is the same number. We will have similar number in other advanced economies. And I'm also pretty sure that it's a fair assumption to make that for some companies, that number may be even much higher than 30%. And so I think just based on that quantitative measure, it just shows how important it is that we create as individual companies and organizations a culture and environment which retains staff, but also as an industry, a kind of environment and in a place where we can retain new talent. And that's not just younger generations coming out of the universities in the years to come or schools. I'm also a bit advocate for that. But it also shows that we need to attract from across other industries. And in order to do that, we just need to also learn how we transfer knowledge and skills effectively. When we try to build those diverse teams, I think the biggest challenge in the insurance industry is that we have this really, we have the two sides of the kind of same medal. We need a lot of experience in our industry. We do need that because we are an industry that makes decisions mostly based on educated guesses. We take risks and we try to do all the research that we can, but ultimately we will not know the outcome. But on the flip side of that, we also need a lot of data for doing that. And so by definition, we really need to attract both. We need to attract people with vast experience, and we need to attract people that have the data, the AI, all the things that I can't do, by the way. And I think what happens, though, is that you get bias in recruiting through that, because you will have one side of the coin saying, well, I value this more, and you will have the other side of the coin saying, I value that more. And then the stereotypes that come in around, you said it earlier, all the generations being tech averse, they don't know how to do this, millennials and Gen Z being lazy, being too demanding. And I think they really hinder promotions, the right recruiting. And I think as a second one, and I'm including myself, I think millennial, self-identified millennial, is a stereotype that I'm really concerned about in our industry, but I think in every most corporate environment. And it's that millennials and Gen Z being, prioritizing work-life balance and mental health over anything else. And that makes them less valuable, that makes them lazy. And unfortunately, social media and all these other tools are kind of making fun of this. I think we've all seen those reels out there where I've been sending them around, where in a corporate environment, you see how every generation reacts to the same situation. And yes, they're funny and we all laugh. But I think what's really dangerous is that it's all intended to stereotype and generalize. And I think we really need to be mindful of that. And I'm not saying let's not have jokes and let's not laugh with each other. I think that's very important. And I think as particular on the topic of work-life balance and in the digital age that we're in, we just had the right to disconnect introduced in Australia. I think it's a very important legislation. It just shows how relevant it is for organizations, industries to build workplaces that are healthy. And so stereotypes that we have, I think, are kind of, defeating that purpose.
Beautiful. Any builds?
Yeah, can't help myself. Thank you for that overview. Really interesting. Couple of things. Retirement as a concept. Globally, and Phil, you touched on this, we see increased longevity, we see reduced fertility rates, we see longer working lives. And so the concept, the notion of retirement is kind of being a little questioned. It doesn't seem to be the automatic cliff that we're all going to drop off at some point. And by the way, the retirement age was very much set to the pension age over 100 years ago, which was 65. And it was a good bet for governments because it meant most people were going to die at 70. That's not the case anymore, thankfully. So, but we are seeing retirement ages creeping up to 67, whatever it is, again, in line with the age pension age. So, there is increasing literature around, actually, is retirement still the thing we should be aiming for, and how can we as corporates actually continue to retain the knowledge, the skills, the expertise? Maybe we need to start thinking about different models. Now, the other thing I want to say about some of the literature around multi-generational workforces is that, yes, it certainly does highlight that what we contribute at different ages is different. Our preferences at different ages is different, perhaps like our communication preferences. But the reality is there's actually more that binds us than separates us. Yes, it's fine. We sort of laugh over the intergenerational divide fence, and that's, you know, I don't want to be the fun police here, but the reality is there's more that binds us. We all want to be valued at work. We all want to see a path. We all want to enjoy our working lives. We all want work-life balance and so on. So that's a really important organising principle, if you like, in terms of building a multi-generational workforce.
Alen, any bells for you?
Obviously, that in workplaces there are natural stereotypes that occur, and I think that when we speak about younger and older individuals, it's important to remember that we're not talking about just 1 or 2 generations. Today's workplaces can span up to 5 generations, and that was, I think, in one of your slides at the opening of the session. So we're really talking about a large number of people and a variety in terms of different ages. As I mentioned earlier, I think that stereotypes can be subtle, but they certainly exist. And the issue with generational stereotypes is that it can lead to assumptions, as has already been mentioned by Anja, in terms of potentially somebody's willingness to learn new things, potentially how someone likes to communicate. You know, there may be a stereotype that older people prefer to speak in person, whereas younger people prefer to communicate via instant messaging. Also different expectations potentially about things like how performance is managed and how feedback is given, all of those sorts of things. The risk with ignoring those types of generational stereotypes is that it can lead to conflicts in the workplace. And that can also lead to a bad culture existing in the workplace. At the extreme end, what you might also get is poor productivity. You may also get instances where there's psychological hazards to individuals at work, and potentially even discrimination claims being made. And that's definitely the point that you don't want to get to. Obviously, my role working as a lawyer in this space is that I get to see the not so fun side of it. And when it does get to the stage of potentially a discrimination claim occurring, but certainly that's something that should be avoided. And the literature out there does support that there are so many benefits to having a diverse workplace in terms of age and intergenerational individuals that can contribute different things based on their experience. So I think that's really needs to be the focus, having that kind of positive direction in terms of having those policies in place to support that. Beautiful.
Can I build on what Alen just said? Because I think it's so important to what you said about there's more, Marlene, you said about there's more that binds us. It's important that we acknowledge the differences, also different types of preferences that people have. I recently sat down with 3 colleagues of mine, and we had talked about intergenerational inclusion. It's something that we talk about a lot this year at Munich Re because it's something we want to spotlight. And what really reminded me and what I walked away with was mostly how amazing it was that people openly talked about their different styles and preferences. And one topic that did come up was communication styles. But what was really heartening was that they laughed about it and they were open and honest, and they would say, you know, I don't return your text message, you have to call me, or I don't do this. And I think this is what it's important. I think when I think about building a good culture and diverse teams, it's also about making, not telling people you all have to do the same, but it's about being honest and upfront about what you need in order to thrive. And that was really something that I walked away with and was quite inspired by.
I love it. So true. The stereotypes are broad generalizations about a group of people that are kind of, there's usually a grain of truth in there, but they certainly don't apply to everybody in the group. And this kind of brings us full circle back to the topic of psychological safety in the workplace and having conversations. As you said, the healthy workplace is where people are very open to discussing their different preferences, their different working styles, because if that communication channel isn't open and we aren't expressing those, it leads people to necessarily use stereotypes because they don't know your preference. They have to kind of guess and make their, lean on their biases to interact with you. So so many of the problems of diversity and inclusion are solved through conversation and open dialogue. So I love that you brought that up. That was great. And Alen, thank you for jumping in on stereotypes and assumptions. That was going to be my next question to you. So you preempted that beautifully, but such an important topic. And again, just to bring some of Sommer's insights in here as well, specific to the industry, but the notion or the perception that if you're not a lifetimer in the insurance industry, then you've not got the 10, 15, 20 years of experience, that your opinions aren't as valid. And homogenous perspectives don't breed, well, they breed an artificial sense of harmony, which, friction is a good and healthy thing. Debate and sharing ideas is a good and healthy thing. So, challenging that assumption and being open to new ways of thinking is a good idea. Wonderful. Marlene, I might throw back to you actually. So we've talked a lot about the nature of the problem. I'd like to kind of steer us towards solutions and the campaigns you've worked on to combat ageism. I'm just wondering, what were some of the interventions? What were some of the strategies? What were some of the things you were thinking about in terms of making change on this topic?
Thank you. Look, the first point I would make here is that we all age in a cultural context. And again, Phil, you set this up for us beautifully. We age in a cultural context that kind of defines what we should have done, achieved, who we should be at a certain age, our roles, our responsibilities to our family at a certain age, and so on and so on. Now, they are culturally defined. And so assuming that everybody holds those attitudes and has those expectations is simply not the case. And the reason that we need to have an understanding of the context in which we age is because the strategies that will suggest themselves will be different based in a cultural frame. So in our particular culture, getting older, if I can just focus on that for a minute, is to be feared, avoided, denied, don't admit our age, and so on. Certainly, many workplaces that I've worked within, people don't feel comfortable telling others their age. So, we need to be mindful of the cultural context. And as I say, the strategies that will be appropriate and relevant in that culture will be informed by that context. So for instance, I might say that mentoring, an older person mentoring a younger person mentoring an older person, is a great strategy for building intergenerational connection. That's not going to be the case in some contexts, in some cultural contexts. So it's really important to be mindful of that. Coming to solutions, the World Health Organization has, through its extensive research, highlighted the 3 strategies that we know combat ageism. So the first one is laws and policies. So we are lucky in this country that all politicians of all sides have bound together to create a strong network of age discrimination laws. Yet survey after survey tells us that discrimination remains rife. So laws are really important, but not sufficient. It's about getting at the cultural context as well. In an organisation, laws and policies mean looking at closely your recruitment, your retention, your promotion, your exit policies, and so on, your diversity, equity, and inclusion policies, strategies. And as Phil said, age is so often not included as a ground of diversity. And unless it's included, well, if it's not included, it's invisible. Hard to have a conversation and start a strategy if it's not embedded in your organisation's approach. The second strategy, education, a no-brainer. Of course, it's about education and awareness. In a corporate context, an organisational context, that might mean education and training for managers to manage age-diverse workforces. That doesn't necessarily just happen or come naturally. There are particular skills and attributes people need to know and need to know their organisation supporting them to enable them to do that. And the third strategy, which is really very much what we're talking about today, is building intergenerational connections and solidarity. If we can get beyond the divisive rhetoric that we know on social media, anywhere we look, is pervasive about pitting generations against each other, we can actually achieve some really profound benefits. Of course, it's about building that inclusion and so on, but it's also about building mutual understanding, developing a shared sense of responsibility, really understanding and working together to achieve the pressing issues of our time. And that's why, if I can just quickly add, intergenerational solidarity has been a key focus of this week's UN Summit of the Future. Because in terms of addressing the global challenges that we're all facing, environment, climate change, whatever it is, it's about building intergenerational solidarity.
Love the term intergenerational solidarity. I think that really brings it home. And I love, excuse me, I loved what you said before in terms of course, we have more in common than we have different as human beings in general. We all want the same things. And again, to channel inclusive design and the principles of inclusive design, we all want to be, we all want a sense of status, we all want a sense of belonging, we all want a sense of certainty. These are universal human desires and drives. And when we boil it down to that, you know, we've all got different shapes and flavors of challenge, but it's all the same. Anja, I might ask you to expand on that from a perspective of creating career opportunities. So when we're thinking about developing talent, especially for those maybe later in their careers as well, I think is an interesting topic. But how are you thinking about, developing talent, developing a pipeline as well from a sort of practical, tactical standpoint?
Very much. Thank you very much for the question. For me, it's really three kind of areas, right? When you think about leadership and creating your talent pipeline, creating your teams, it's about recruiting. I think one philosophy that we try to follow at Munich Re is recruiting not at the merits that someone or the skills that someone's presenting today. It's also looking at the potential. And for me, a very integral part, and that's where it comes to that element of generational stereotypes that we have, is also investing into upskilling of employees and future talent. Because I think, yes, there is more effort in the beginning potentially, but those efforts will certainly pay off. I think I've never in my career have hired someone where we did invest in the potential that we saw in someone, gave them the tools that didn't pay off. And I think as a company, as individuals, but as an industry and society, we're better off because we're creating significantly more versatile employees, especially if we're looking in talent shortage down the road. I think for the insurance industry, that's something that we should be looking into much more. And when I talk about upskilling, I think it's sometimes very simple things. It's a little anecdote from a previous role that I had. I think, Phil, you said that everyone here in this room has said it before. I'm too old, I can't do this. I'm too young, I can't do this. We've all heard it, we've all said it, we all thought it. And I'm going to make a generalization on that one. But and I had this colleague and on the sales side of our business, and as you can imagine, something like PowerPoint, it's a very simple, easy example, is very important because you need to go client decks and you need to do presentations, and because we love our PowerPoints, we do that in this medium. And he said to me, I can't do this. Go give it to the younger ones. I won't learn this anymore. I'm 59 years old. I won't learn this. And I said, you will, and I'll help you. And it took us a little bit. And obviously he needed support. But I think half a year, 7-8 months later, he was very capable of creating his own slide decks for his own client meetings. And I think this is what, for me, upskilling can look like. It's not the big data. Sometimes upskilling tends to go into this, big new digital side, but it's really simple steps. And that's very important. And the second message in there that I kind of want to give is it's about providing the opportunity to learn and for personal growth, but it's also about cultivating a culture where we encourage personal growth, and we do not allow people to kind of also give up on themselves because the bias they have towards themselves have already kind of put them in their own corner. I think that's a really, really important element. And then third, just to pick up again on what I said earlier, is I think sometimes when we talk about these diverse teams, it's the culture we create. It's the mindset we have. And there's sometimes when we talk about DEI, and we recently had an active inclusion workshop in our team, and people are almost afraid to say the wrong thing. And I think what I really want to highlight is the conversation is what we need, and we don't need to be perfect all the time. We don't need to say the right word. And I think if we create a psychological safety, if we create that generational solidarity, and we just have the conversation, that's what we really need. And we can have a good laugh. And as long as we trust each other's intentions, that's quite important.
Any builds, team?
Just in terms of strategy, I suppose, I think there is no one-size-fits-all approach, and it's going to vary, and it's going to depend on things like the size of your organisation and the makeup of your organisation. There's certainly, as Marlene mentioned, certain strategies that are known to work. A great starting point is having a policy in place for diversity inclusion, specifically in relation to age. I think a lot of employers are moving away from having an anti-discrimination policy or something that's relatively general or broad to having a policy that's more positively framed in terms of trying to encourage diversity inclusion and making sure that it references specific things like recruitment, promotion, how people like to communicate, all of those sorts of things. What has already been mentioned as well is the power of connectivity and getting people to actually work together and learn more about each other, because I think that's how you really prove that this works, that if you do that, there's actually benefits that come from it. And the example that you gave is a really great one, Anja, because it just shows that there was somebody that had fear of the unknown, and you walk them through something, and now they've got a new skill that they never had before, and that's going to benefit not only them but potentially your organisation going forward. I think it's important as well that we challenge each other's biases when they do arise, and that if conflicts occur, that we act on them quickly. If you see something in the workplace that doesn't seem quite right, especially relating to potentially age discrimination, call it out. And that's, I think, really powerful, because when someone does that, it just shuts the whole thing down, and it empowers a person that might have been the target in that kind of scenario, and the person that did the calling out will be respected. I can assure you that they will going forward. So I think if there's something there that doesn't seem quite right, don't just sit back and let it happen. Actually take a positive step, because I guarantee you that it's going to have a positive impact going forward.
Absolutely. And both of you touched on this, and I'll just kind of tie a bow on top. The need to have the conversations, and absolutely calling out the active prejudice and discrimination that we see that's obviously completely inappropriate. That's obviously one aspect of it. The vast majority, though, is it just showing up from well-intentioned people as bias, as stereotypes. Most of the time, it's not people who are actively trying to exclude people, it's unintentional exclusion. And that's where being able to have conversations, creating an environment where we can skillfully go, hey, I know you were trying to be funny in the meeting earlier when you made that joke, just wanted to let you know that didn't land for me. What do you think about that? And have a discussion about that, and for that to be okay is how change happens. Absolutely.
Can I just really reinforce that point? What you want to do here is try and create an ally, not someone in opposition to you. And as you're saying, Phil, that a lot of this is unintentional. It's the first time people may have been challenged. So if you talk about the impact on you, how that ageist joke made you feel, how you feel about perhaps why you were overlooked for promotion, why you don't feel comfortable, telling people your age, whatever it is, you actually have the opportunity to turn some lights on, and that's really important. But the other point I just want to make in relation to what my colleagues have said is that I am actually really optimistic in this space. You know, diversity, equity and inclusion professionals and the executive and managers and people who work with them have been extremely successful in changing how we think, act and feel about women in the workforce, people of different cultural backgrounds in the workforce. You've been so successful at challenging racism, sexism, homophobia, and incorporating cultural diversity. I guess I'm calling on people to apply your pure genius to this area, and I'm really optimistic that you'll turn this around.
Great point, Marlene. Thank you. One more question, and I'll throw it your way, Alen, and then we'll go to some of the Slido questions. So just a reminder, if you do have anything to ask, pop it in Slido, and we'll get to as many as we can. But just I'd like to kind of ask if you see any legislative changes on the horizon that organisations need to have on their radar and be aware of and prepare for. What's happening in that space, Alen?
Yeah, the short answer is no. In the
short question, short answer. Thank you, Alen.
I don't see anything happening in the near horizon. I think that at the moment there probably isn't enough data to suggest, or there's no drive to suggest that that's something that requires legislative change. And I want to point out that sometimes legislative change isn't always positive, because when there is something that's confined to legislation, you can create a relatively rigid framework, and that isn't sometimes ideal. As has already been mentioned, we already have certain protections in place. We've got the Age Discrimination Act, which has been in force since 2004, and that protects individuals from discrimination, age discrimination, not just in workplaces, but in other areas as well. Interestingly, in the 20-year period since that legislation has been in place, there's only been one case where age discrimination has been successfully established. So I think that's probably a skewed statistic. It probably reflects more how many cases get resolved at an earlier stage. But I think obviously it doesn't probably shed enough light on how prevalent it is in workplaces. I know that earlier this year we also had a new age discrimination commissioner appointed back in April 2024, and he's openly said that he is committed to preventing discrimination against older Australians in the workplace going forward. Marlene, I'm reliably informed that you attended a National Press Club meeting yesterday with the Commissioner, and I believe one of the topics of conversation was, should we have anti-ageism day in Australia? So I think that there's definitely conversation about these sorts of things happening, but I don't see any near legislative change being on the horizon. So I think that for the time being, it's really up to organisations to try and tackle this issue and to come up with measures in terms of supporting generational inclusion.
Wonderful. Organisations have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility and are often far ahead of the curve when it comes to putting things into practice. I'll throw a couple of these questions. We are not going to get to all of them because they're coming through thick and fast now, but thank you for asking. I'll try and choose a couple that encompass the kind of the themes and the spirit here, but this is a good one. As organizations get leaner, how do we best ensure knowledge sharing, especially as we are expecting our people to do more with less resources? Okay, if you can solve that, you've earned a commission, but you'd love to get some thoughts there.
And I try to take a crack at it. So I think, first off, as an organization, if we're trying to do less with more resources, it shouldn't put more burden on our employees. I think that's very important. And I think the focus for that should be to create, use AI, use other tools available to us because of the digitalization that we've been seeing to just make faster and easier processes that lead less human involvement. And that kind of time that we free up, I think this is actually where we need to focus on knowledge transfer. I think that should be the core focus of most organizations in today's day and age. And I think we also need to make the topic of knowledge transfer deliberate. We're having a lot of discussions within Munich Re, for example, where we say we need to write things more down. And it's not because we need to document it for kind of auditing purposes, but because we need to document knowledge. Because we are an institution or we are an industry where a lot of knowledge sits in our brains rather than, being written up in Wikipedia and other and kind of publicly available information. And so I think it's having that conversation and making it a priority.
Wonderful.
Can I just add a slightly different perspective? One of the things that we notice in many organisations is a lack of data, which is age disaggregated. So we might have fine stratifications around our employees, or even in terms of our customer base, let's say 17 to 21, 21 to 25, whatever it is, whatever makes sense. And then we get to 50 or 55 or 65, and it's everyone over that age. And this is more common than you might think. And so how do we possibly know what the different needs of people are at different ages? Because 45 is different to 65 is different to so on and so forth. So, and we would never clump people who were 15 with people who were 30 in the same way that we would people who are 55 and 65 and so on. So we need to understand the data a whole lot better, and that will give you insights into where your pain points might be as an organisation, and then you can develop your strategies accordingly, including your knowledge transfer issues.
Wonderful. We are running fast short on time, I know. We've got one very upvoted question, and I'm going to give you 30 seconds to answer it, so no pressure. The insurance products discriminate based on age, usually through price. How do we design products that are based on true underlying risk rather than just age? Go.
Anja, surely that's a question for you.
I'm afraid Sommer's not here because I think it would be a question for Sommer. I honestly do not have an answer.
All right, we'll summon Sommer another time, and I think we might have to do a round two. I think it's time we might have to start closing out the session. First of all, I would just invite you to all give a massive round of applause for our wonderful. A couple of final bits of housekeeping. If you're interested in getting a worksheet based on that whole systems model I shared at the start, you can scan that QR code, you can click on the link if you're joining us online, and you can download that for yourself to play with. Say, really useful tool when you're thinking through any strategy or change processes to give you some kind of dimensions and some prompts to think about. So please make sure we do that, and I'm sure we can share that QR code and that link around afterwards as well. Going the wrong way on the presentation. There we go. Feedback as well. We would love to get your feedback on this session. Again, if you're online, I think a link is being shared with you. Please take a second to scan that QR code. Let us know what you liked. Let us know what you think we could have done better. Let us know what you want to hear about next time in terms of, because yeah, why not? There'll be a round two. But yeah, your feedback is very much appreciated as part of this event. Again, that'll get sent around to you afterwards. And lastly, while we close out for our online audience, obviously we're going to hang around for a bit in the room. Massive thank you to Munich Re and Kennedy's for hosting this wonderful event. Massive thank you to our panelists once again, and a massive thank you to all of you, because you took your time out of your day to come and engage in a conversation about this really, really important topic. So I'd invite you to give yourselves a round of applause. All right, I think we can say goodbye to our online audience now. So for those of you who are staying around in the room, some points of order. We have some door prizes.